My perspective on AI, or the way I come to it, tends to be in a very practical sense, because I'm looking at it in a business context most of the time and grappling with businesses about the ways in which they can adopt or deploy AI or forms of AI. There's quite a bit of fake AI out there in business, but forms of artificial intelligence in a business context. And so I was going to speak a little bit about sort of the ethics and the regulation of AI. I quite often get asked about the regulation of AI and how is AI regulated, or is it going to be regulated, and I've got a few views on that. I think using the term ethics is it's quite a sort of charged term, certainly in a legal context. And I think ethics are pretty relative things and very contextual as well. And so if we think about the ethics of using AI in the context of a mortgage approval process, to Ellie's point earlier, that's very different to the way in which ethics play into the use of AI in deployment of emergency aid or profiling of offenders. So I tend to think of, rather than the ethical use of AI, I tend to think in terms of responsible use of AI, which is a sort of slightly easier concept to grasp, at least in a business context when talking to boards. Doubtless that incorporates some sense of ethics, but I think it's a sort of broader concept than just ethics. I guess what I take from talking to the real techie experts, and I know there's a whole bunch of data scientists in the audience as well as on the panel here, is that generally speaking, AI is probably not as intelligent as it thinks it is, or at least quite yet. And so responsible use of AI, certainly in a business context, for me it's as much about understanding the limitations of what an algorithm or the black box can do, what it can't do, as it is about sort of understanding what the use cases are. So I think again from my perspective, looking at the way in which AI is deployed in an enterprise context is about managing legal risk, and managing legal risk is typically about disclosure, and adequate disclosure is typically about your understanding of what it is that you're doing. And so understanding the limitations of, in whatever use case it is, your deployment of AI, to my mind, is sort of is critical. Regulation of AI, and sort of, is it regulated? Will it be regulated? Actually, I think regulation of AI is a bit of a misnomer. There are aspects of data use, data analytics, that are already very heavily regulated, and if anyone here hasn't had a GDPR email in the last few months, so please raise your hand. So there's quite a bit of regulation sort of already extant that impacts on aspects of the use of AI or the deployment of AI. Of course, there are other specific use cases of AI that can be regulated, and any sort of non-human decision-making or control in certain more sensitive sectors is subject already actually to quite significant regulation. Thinking about aviation, thinking about healthcare and surgery, thinking about warfare. There are already legal frameworks that are impacting on the way in which non-human methods of decision-making can be deployed. So there is already, in that sense, regulation of AI. And of course, AI is increasingly now being used to regulate. In the financial services context especially, regulators are using algorithmic tools to monitor for market abuse in financial markets. And there are other ways in which regulators are able to use data analytics to better regulate the conduct of non-technological behaviours. But I think generically regulating AI is a misnomer. It would be like saying we need to regulate the use of steam during the Industrial Revolution. I mean, so what does it mean to regulate AI? So I personally don't see that there's a need for, or that there will be, a sort of regulation of Artificial Intelligence Act 2020. I don't think that will ever come to pass, and I find it hard to imagine how any government could credibly seek to regulate AI as a concept. And then finally, I guess I'd add that when I think about responsible deployment of AI, particularly in a business context, I very much come at it as a sort of a governance issue. That the way in which businesses, and frankly other organisations, governments and agencies, approach the deployment of AI in a live fire context is really all about governance and good governance. And the UK government is sort of beginning to lead a path that way with creating this new Centre for Data and Ethics, which I think it's not totally clear what it's going to be doing, but it seems like the focus is going to be around creating governance structures or ways of thinking about how to make proper decisions around deployment of AI. And so I personally think that good governance around AI deployment is going to be far more relevant and important than any sort of legislation or regulation.